Picture this, a massive stone fortress, standing completely isolated in the middle of a freezing ocean, locked tight from the outside. Inside, the beds are unmade, the clocks have completely stopped, and the men who were supposed to be guarding the light have simply vanished into thin air. Welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to unpack one of the most chilling, genuinely unsolved true mysteries of the last century. It's a 120-year-old story that will really make you question what goes on in the darkest, most isolated corners of our world. 3 seasoned men disappeared from a locked island without a trace, and what they left behind in their logbook will absolutely chill your blood. To really wrap our heads around how impossible this disappearance is, we've got to go back to the setup. The year is December 1900. The location is Elian Moor, which is the largest of the Flannan Isles, sitting about 32 kilometers off of the notoriously jagged west coast of Scotland. Now, the locals called these islands the Seven Hunters, and they firmly believe this entire area was cursed. But, to prevent devastating shipwrecks, the government went ahead and built a brand new, magnificent 75-foot-tall lighthouse on this really foreboding rock in 1899. Running this beacon, that was not a job for the faint of heart. It was completely, totally cut off from the rest of civilization. Okay, let's dive into this. Just look at the crew chosen for this assignment. First, we have James Duquette, the head keeper, bringing over 20 years of hard-earned experience. Then there's Thomas Marshall, a highly skilled assistant. And finally, Donald MacArthur, who was famously known as a notoriously tough sailor. He'd spent his entire life battling the most vicious oceans on Earth. These weren't guys who got seasick on a weekend ferry ride. These were highly experienced, incredibly hardened veterans of the sea. They were exactly the kind of men completely unfazed by typical storms. The ocean was basically their home. But on the night of December 15th, something went terribly, horribly wrong. A ship named the Archdor was passing by on its way from Philadelphia to Scotland. The captain looks through his binoculars, expecting to see the bright guiding light of Elian Moor, but he sees only pitch black. The lighthouse was entirely dead. Now, if you know anything about the maritime world, a dead lighthouse means immediate, massive danger. The Archdor reported the blackout 3 days later, but fate kind of stepped in. A ferocious, absolutely historical 11-day storm whipped up, making the ocean so violent that literally no ship could get anywhere near the island. It wasn't until December 26, the day after Christmas, that a relief ship called the Hesperus finally fought through the crushing waves, carrying a replacement keeper named Joseph Moore. When the Hesperus finally arrived, there was no welcome flag, nobody waiting down at the dock. Joseph Moore had to climb the massive stairs up to the lighthouse completely alone, his heart practically pounding out of his chest. And what he found inside was a scene just frozen in time. The main door was locked from the outside. When he finally forced his way in, the silence was totally deafening. The ashes in the fireplace were completely cold, which meant no fire had been lit for days. The clocks on the wall had just stopped ticking. In the kitchen, a single chair lay overturned on the floor, almost as if someone had jumped up in pure, sudden panic. It was literally like time had just stopped. But here is the physical clue that really messes with your head. The coats. Right by the entry gate, there were pegs for the keeper's heavy waterproof gear. 2 of the coats were missing, but the third coat, the one belonging to Donald MacArthur, was still hanging right there on its hook. His heavy boots were sitting right beneath it. Think about this for a second. Outside, an apocalyptic winter sea is raging. Donald MacArthur, an incredibly tough, seasoned sailor who knows better than anyone how lethal that cold is, apparently runs out into the freezing Scottish winter without his waterproof coat or boots. What could possibly cause a man like that to panic so completely? Searching desperately for any kind of answer, Joseph Moore finds the official logbook sitting on a desk. And the entries he reads will honestly send shivers down your spine. On December 12th, Thomas Marshall wrote about severe winds, noting he had never seen a storm this bad in his 20 years at sea. But then he wrote this exact quote: "Donald MacArthur is crying." Just let that sink in. Donald MacArthur, the battle-hardened, fearsome sailor who had sailed the world's worst oceans, the guy who literally never flinched at danger, was reduced to tears by whatever was happening outside that tower. The very next day, December 13th, the logbook entries grow even more desperate. Thomas wrote, "Storm still raging. We cannot go out. We are praying." Just picture it. 3 veteran sailors, men who have spent their entire lives conquering the sea, are huddled inside a 70-foot solid stone tower, utterly terrified, literally praying for their lives. It paints this incredibly dark picture of profound, inescapable dread. But right here is where this whole story takes a massive, mind-bending turn. When authorities later investigated all this, they actually pulled the official weather records for the region surrounding the island for December 12th, 13th, and 14th. Now, while the logbook describes an apocalyptic, world-ending storm, the official weather records prove that the skies were completely clear. The sea was calm, there was no storm. So, what were they actually hiding from? I mean, if there was no storm on the ocean, what was tearing these men apart inside that tower? The very last entry in the entire logbook was written at 9 a.m. on December 15th. It simply read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." And after that, nothing. Just total silence. Now, even though the weather records showed totally calm seas, the physical damage on the actual island told a completely different story. Exactly 100 feet above sea level, over on the island's west landing, the investigation team found a scene of absolute devastation. Really heavy iron railings were just twisted and snapped like twigs, massive supply boxes were smashed to pieces, and a rock weighing over 1 ton had been violently displaced and thrown several feet. Try to imagine the sheer, terrifying force required to throw a 1-ton boulder like it's a pebble. Whatever happened out there, it packed an unimaginably powerful physical punch. All right, so let's walk through some of the theories to see how we can make sense of this, starting with the official explanation. Superintendent Robert Muirhead, who actually knew the men well, concluded this. Since the log said the storm ended on the 15th, he believed James and Thomas put on their raincoats to go secure some loose gear down at the West Landing. Suddenly, a monstrous 100-foot rogue wave, just a freak wall of water, rises from the deep. Donald sees this happening from the lighthouse window, panics, leaves his coat behind, kicks over the chair in a rush, and sprints out to warn them. But he's too late, and this monster wave sweeps all 3 men right into the abyss. It's a theory that logically explains the physical damage, and it explains the missing coats. But you know what? It doesn't explain the crying. And that brings a lot of people to a much darker theory: cabin fever and madness. Think about 3 men locked up in a tiny tower, surrounded by the deafening roar of the ocean for weeks on end. The psychological toll of that kind of severe isolation can be absolutely devastating. Some folks suspect that the tough-tempered Donald simply snapped. A violent argument breaks out, which perfectly explains that overturned kitchen chair. In a fit of madness, Donald murders James and Thomas, throws their bodies into the sea, and then, completely overcome by the horror of what he had just done, he jumps in after them. And finally, of course, you've got the theories that embrace the island's dark history. Remember, the locals fully believed Island Moor was cursed. Over the years, whispers have spread about giant sea monsters or ancient spirits claiming the men who dared to build on their rock. Some firmly believe the keepers were actually plagued by a ghost storm, a terrifying tempest of the mind, projected by supernatural forces, a storm that only existed in the reality of those 3 doomed men. And look, while we obviously can't prove the supernatural, the sheer impossibility of the physical evidence keeps these eerie legends very much alive today. For over 120 years, the Atlantic has held its breath, keeping the secret of the 3 men who simply ceased to exist. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur vanished from a locked island, leaving behind a mystery that continues to completely baffle experts today. Sometimes the most terrifying mysteries aren't found in fiction at all, but right there in the blank spaces of our own history. I really want to hear from you on this one. Was it just a freak of nature, or was it something a whole lot more sinister? Drop your theories in the comments below and make sure to follow for more hidden history stories.